Hello and welcome back to Dukascopy TV. I'm Natalie MacDonald. Now, sanctions have very much been in the headlines of recent weeks, but here to talk about how they're impacting shipping and trading is HR Maritime's Richard Watts. Richard, thank you very much for coming in today. Now, to get started on the sanctions, well, sanctions generally speaking, actually, really, who are they impacting and what type of sanctions are we seeing at present in shipping and trading?
Sanctions over the last couple of years has become a huge subject. It's a very complex subject. Basically, from about 1945 up until 1990, sanctions were used about 2 times. And at the moment we have sanctions against about over 35 countries, ranging from Afghanistan, Iran, Iraq, Syria, Sudan, Israel, the Arab state embargoes, USA for some retaliatory sanctions, Russia that we're seeing at the moment. And so they're very difficult to keep track of and know exactly who is sanctioned against and who is not. We have the main sanctioned countries at the moment. So Cuba, which has been sanctioned for an awful long time by America. We also have Iran. We have North Korea, we have Sudan, and so these are the countries which are really causing problems at the moment. And as far as these sanctions, we have 3 main types of sanctions. First of all, the economic sanctions, and so those are very much stopping the trade with a country, and they can be specific to one commodity, they can be specific to exports, to imports, or they can be for every type of commodity, really trying to stop the economic activity. We also have arms embargoes, and we have more and more sanctions against individuals.
You talk about how there's been a real boost in the number of sanctions in recent years. How subsequently does this impact world trade, and also what are the potential longer term effects?
And so we see a number of different impacts. First of all, there's the financial impact. So whenever you're dealing with world trade, you are making a lot of payments. So there's a payment for the actual commodity itself, there's the payment for the freight, there's a payment for the inspection, for the insurance, and all these payments, whether you're doing them in dollars or in euros, they'll be going through the major financial centers, and so these payments can be blocked. And so if there's a suspicion of a problem, of a breach of sanctions, then your payment might get rejected, or even worse, get blocked and you don't really know what's going on. We also have the insurance aspect, because all cargoes that are being moved around the world have to be insured. All the vessels moving around the world have to be insured as well, because they're all being financed by banks, and part of the deal of the financing is to have them insured. Most of the insurance markets are in the United States, in Europe and in England, and so immediately these will be impacted by the sanctions. And also we have companies which are listed either in America or in Europe, and these companies will have regulatory requirements, and so that will cause problems for them as well. And so we're seeing these problems go further into the long term, and so we're going to see an impact on the dollar payments, on people's use of dollars, how to manage these things in the long run. The problem is that we might see a move away to different currencies, but at the moment there isn't really any other currency that can take the place. People might say there's euro, but also in euro we have the sanctions as well. And so we see a little bit moving into barter trade, and so swapping one good for another. This has been going on for years, and it's an interesting way of dealing with countries which are impacted by sanctions. But again, we can't manage very large volumes working that way. So I think we're going to see more and more impacts as the time goes by.
What solutions then are being developed in order to combat these issues?
Well, there are a number of different ways of handling it. Obviously, you can simply say, well, I'm not going to deal in dollars or euros. You can say, I'm going to bury my head in the sand and not even think about it, but it's going to catch up with you. It's much more of a problem for big companies. It's a problem for the companies which have operations in the United States, and so these are being impacted a lot more, but we're going to see it filtering down over time. What happens is if you're chartering a vessel, if you're going to load cargo on board of a vessel, you're going to charter a vessel, and so if you want to make sure that your vessel is not covered by sanctions, and the problem with sanctions is really the wording that they use. Best efforts, due diligence. These the phrases don't really mean anything, and the phrases haven't been chosen by accident. They've been chosen so that the authorities have the largest scope of action. And so if I'm going to charter a vessel, I will start looking at the different details of the vessel. Who is the owner, who is the manager, who is the technical manager, what is the flag of the vessel, and I will be looking at these against various sanction lists on websites, the OFAC list. I will also have to look at the movements of the vessel, and this is incredibly time consuming. We have a number of different services now. I think the best that I've seen is run by a company called Polestar, called Purple Track, and this is simply you put in the registration number of any vessel, and within about 5 seconds it will come back with a complete analysis of the owners, the managers, all the parties involved, whether they are on any of the sanctions list. You can choose which sanctions list you are looking for, and also it will look at the physical movement of the vessel by satellite tracking over the last 90 days to see whether it went into any sanctioned countries, and it will look at the port state control history of the vessel to see whether there are any issues. And so this way you can show that you are actually doing your best effort, you are doing your due diligence to make sure that you're not breaching sanctions.
What consequences are we seeing at present then? I mean, you mentioned that it is some of the larger organisations impacted by this, and we're also seeing several banks that have been impacted by sanctions.
So the consequences, as I mentioned, we have payments rejected. And so this can be very, very difficult. I mean, if you have an obligation under a contract to make a payment within a certain date and your payment is blocked, then it's very difficult to know what to do in that situation. And often you can't get much information about what the solution will be, how long your payment will be blocked for. Also, we have a situation if you have been in breach of sanctions, then often your insurance will be void. And so if your insurance is void, then you have a major problem, because suddenly the bank that's financed your cargo or your vessel, they will often withdraw the financing if there's no insurance for it. Also, investigation by the US authorities. This is something that a lot of people will go a long way not to be investigated by the US authorities, because it can be very, very time consuming and very, very difficult to manage. And also we can find companies which are being blacklisted by other companies because as part of their regulatory requirements they don't want to do business with companies which are suspected of breaching sanctions. And so it can have a knock-on effect. And so we see a number of banks which are being impacted at the moment and which have been fined over the last couple of years. We have Royal Bank of Scotland, we have HSBC, we have Credit Suisse recently, we have BNP which is being investigated at the moment, and this is becoming more and more of a problem for the banks, and we're going to see it filtering down into the smaller banks as time goes on.
In your view then, what is the next step to all of this?
Well, one thing that we all agree on is that sanctions are not going to go away. It's been proven that it is a very, very efficient and cost-efficient method of waging war against a country. And so as this continues, it's really a question of how do we work with it? How do we fully understand the sanctions? And I think we're going to see companies which are going to really get to understand the sanctions, work with them and try and minimise the impact of them or be able to get on with their business. And apart from that, it's going to be employ more compliance officers, do more checking and use third-party applications or internal services which allow us to check that we're not breaching sanctions very, very quickly and get on with the business in hand.
Richard, thank you very much for coming in and sharing your expertise on this topic. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
That's all we've got time for right now, but we'll be back shortly with plenty more exclusive interviews for you, so don't go away. Goodbye.